Welcome back to the channel. I think that's what I should say anyway. This is the long-awaited, and I'll explain, part 2, or I'll make it part 2, to the original Jeep valve cover gasket video. And I had quite a few complaints. Interestingly though, I have, what would it be, 800% more thumbs up on that video than any other of my 120 or 30 videos. But anyway, I had a lot of complaints that I showed the process except the passenger side. So I haven't looked back at the video, but I kind of remember doing that, and it sounds like something I would do, where I just kind of explained what to do without actually showing it on film. So trying to get better, and finally this vehicle came in needing the same repair, and I've been waiting for that so that I can film it once again, but I'll just film the passenger side on this one and label it part 2 to that other video and try to link each of them in the description of the other. So anyway, this is a 2005, I think it is, 3.7 liter Jeep Liberty, and it has a very, very bad valve cover gasket leak. You can smell this thing idling from across the street. It's burning so much oil. So we're going to pull off the valve covers, make sure. I did get one comment on that other video that they had a dime-sized hole in their valve cover, so we're going to make darn sure that there's no holes and get the gaskets replaced, and then follow up and make sure it no longer stinks. So what I've done so far, just a couple small things that I didn't film before I turned it on, is remove the intake boot. That's an 8mm or 5/16 on that hose clamp, and then you just need to unclip your top half of the airbox and you can pull that out. The only other thing is this had an intake air temperature sensor, so you just need to unplug that from the boot, the intake boot. You can pull that all off, there it is, and then remove your air filter just to get it out of the way. You can remove this whole section of the airbox. I haven't really looked at it. I don't remember if it's bolted in or just pushed into some grommets. So you might see that in a future clip here if I pull that out. It's just a little bit in the way, but not too bad. But we'll see. If it's just pressed in there, I'm going to go ahead and pop that out and get it out of the way. Next thing I'm planning to do is remove the clamp from my coolant hose right here and right here. It's focusing on my hand. And then I'm going to remove this whole overflow reservoir. So I'll get that done. I'll take a closer look at the airbox and be right back. Okay, moving along here. I'm working on the overflow reservoir. These are 10mm bolts, or nuts I should say. Don't have my tripod today, so doing my best. I know people like to see me work rather than just explain it, so here you can see me removing a 10mm nut. And unhooked that bottom hose like I mentioned, and the upper hose here, and then this should just kind of slide and lift out. So I did get the airbox out. I want to show that. It's grommeted in 3 places. One of them snapped. These 2 popped out okay. But one thing I want to say is make sure you remove your breather hose from the airbox. So slide it off of here. It's nice and loose. If you don't, when you rip this out and it kind of breaks loose, you risk snapping your T here on the PCV. So here's a couple plastic and really hard rubber dried up PCV hoses, and this T right here snapped. So now I'm gonna have to cut these back and figure out a way to get that routed again, but it'll save you a little bit of hassle and time if you make sure to disconnect from your airbox first and let that gently sit over here out of the way before you yank the airbox out. So anyway, got that out of the way, and you can see we're almost there. So we have all kinds of access now. Just about the last thing to do, and I'm going to kind of jinx myself by saying that, there's actually a couple more steps. We need to take off the oil filler neck right here. We need to release, and I get a lot of questions about that, release these heater hoses or heater lines so that those have some flexibility to get out of our way. And then we also have to remove the wiring, or at least get it up out of the way enough to get to the top valve cover bolts. So on this ignition wiring, we've got to get that out of the way, and then we're pretty well there. And you can see, let me get a flashlight, kind of a way to diagnose this, other than the smell, is look at how wet the bottom half of this valve cover is. So basically what's happening, and the smoke here is from the coolant, not the oil. What's happening is the exhaust manifold is directly below the valve cover on pretty much any vehicle. And so if you have, and I'm not making a blanket statement for all cars, but on this particular vehicle, if you have a strong oil smell, it's most likely that the oil is dripping down from that leaky gasket right on your exhaust and causing the smell, because there's nothing else above that point to cause a leak. The valve cover is the highest point with oil, for the most part, in the engine. So here you can see how wet it is, dripping right down there on the exhaust. And then if we look at the other side, it's a little harder to see right now, but down in there it's wet as well, and you can see that stain on the exhaust heat shield dripping down there. And actually on the last Jeep I did in the first video, it was dripping down, again hard to show, but dripping down on basically the O2 sensor. Right down there you can see those wires and the harness dripping on that, and it also caused the O2 sensor to fail because it got so oily at 808 at the wiring and caused some problems there. So anyway, I'll keep moving along here. I'm going to show these heater hoses as best as I can without my tripod while I'm working to show you how to remove those. So I'll get on with that and be right back. So here's what you want to do on these heater hoses. First thing is to remove the clamps. So you have 4 spring clamps. You can see the 2 down there that I slid back. And you can kind of pick your tool for this. One of my favorites is a long reach needle nose, a right angle if it fits in your particular application. I got this new double jointed needle nose, so that gives you a really long reach, and it also opens about twice as wide as what the handles are, so you can use it one-handed and open it real wide. Slip joint, like channel locks, is also really handy, or I did get this new tool if you can get it in there in this particular location. Otherwise, this works better on larger, like radiator hose clamps. This is a remote hose clamp pliers, and it's really cool. You just hook on this lower portion, and then you can see as I'm squeezing, it's going to squeeze the clamp together, and then up here, when you squeeze it so far, it locks in and holds the clamp. I don't know why it's not focusing. Holds the clamp disengaged, so you can slide it off. Then you just pull the lever and release it. So that's pretty cool. It did not work in this particular application, but it's an option for other things. So anyway, what we're going to do next is just give each of these hoses a little bit of a twist to break it loose from the barb. And then another thing I got a lot of comments on is how do you release these heater hoses in that little bracket right there. I'm going to get rid of the flashlight. It's not helping. How do you release those? And in the last video, I did show how to do that, but now I'm realizing I don't think you need to release those because they're just slid onto a stud and there's nothing securing them to that stud. So I think what we're going to do is just give these hoses a twist. Here I've got my handy right angle needle nose, and it works Very good. This is one of my favorite tools for a variety of jobs. Just twist those. We're going to lose some coolant, but that's okay. Slide them off. This is also a good time to do a heater core flush while you got these things off. And I've got a video on that as well. Okay, so you release those. Back here, there's another one of those clamps, but it's also just slid on to like a stud. It's actually one of the valve cover studs. With this one though, it's sort of locked on, so you just gotta pull that off, like so. And then on the front, once you release those lower hoses, this will slide right off. There you can see it's all free. So once I unhook those lower hoses, this entire assembly will pull out. And you just need to remember how it's routed. It's routed underneath the AC line and underneath this bracket. But that's about it. So that way you don't need to release those clamps at all, or those brackets. You just release the hoses and slide this thing right out. So I'm going to do that quick. I need both hands, but hopefully that makes sense to this point. Okay, I better show this quick. So I've got the lower hoses unhooked now, and I'm just going to slide this back and then kind of start to twist it to tuck it underneath the AC line right here and lift it right out. So there's your entire heater hose assembly removed. Now we've got very easy access to this oil filler neck, and you do have a gasket for that in the kit that I mentioned in the other part. We'll call that part 1. And then we need to kind of just get this wiring out of the way. This wiring is just slid on to some studs and also attached to your coils. So I think we'll unhook the 3 coils just to get some flexibility, and then pull this wiring kind of up and out so that we can get to those top set of bolts. We won't actually disconnect the entire harness. We're just going to disconnect it from the coils to give us a little bit more of a reach. So we'll get that out of the way, and then we should have access to all, 10 of our bolts. So I'll be right back. Okay guys, so a little bit more progress, but I'll try to stick right along with you. I removed the oil filler neck, and once again, anything plastic and PCV related is just dry, and it is cracking. So as soon as I loosened this, it basically just fell off because this is so brittle. I need to double check, but I think this is actually the PCV valve, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll double check and update you guys if that's the case for the repair on that. For the repair on that other line that I said I broke, what my plan is there is it's just a T that broke, and then it's 3 plastic lines going into that T. I'm just going to trim those lines off with like a die grinder. I'm going to cut those lines and then get a new T and then some short little rubber chunks to couple the plastic T to the plastic line. So I'll show that in much more detail later, but if those break, don't panic. In my case, the parts store doesn't even list those hoses, so since it's just PCV, we'll be okay. We'll get it figured out. But anyway, I got the filler neck off. I got my wiring just lifted off of these studs so that it's pretty well free. It is still attached by the fuel injectors, so if you end up needing more flexibility, you can disconnect your fuel injector connectors. I'm going to try not doing that, just with how brittle everything is. I want to disconnect as little as possible. And I did disconnect my ignition coils, but I'm not 100% if that's even necessary. So with that, I've got my valve cover bolts loose, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. We're going to probably need a gentle pry bar or a mallet to break this thing loose because it's going to be baked on there. So I'm going to get a couple different things. Kind of a wide flat screwdriver. You don't want to bend your valve cover. So you got to be careful doing this. I'm just finding a spot to give it a little pry. Right in there is where I went, right up against the side of the AC compressor. Just twist the screwdriver and that popped it all loose. So now, with a little finesse, you should be able to squeeze this out of here. And of course, I'm not going to be able to do it one-handed, but it's looking like worst case scenario. If I don't have enough flexibility in the wiring, I'm just going to have to disconnect a couple things down here to move that. But we'll see what happens. I'm going to give it a shot, and I'll update you here in a second. My hands are all oily, but I'm going to try to show what I did here. So I just stretched, I shouldn't say stretched, I gently lifted this wiring up and over the valve cover, and then if you kind of twist the valve cover out from the top, you get this, and then you can slide it out. So I did not have to disconnect anything extra, and to add to that, you do not need to disconnect your ignition coils. So not a big deal if you did, but you can leave those on. So you'll just lift that wiring up and over, give the valve cover a twist outward, and then slide it right up and out. There you go. Got it out. So now we're just going to inspect everything and swap over the gaskets. I won't show that. I showed that in great detail on part 1. So you can watch that. It's basically just a process of prying this off, popping the grommets out, and then putting them on the new bolts and sliding those in. So I'll do that. I'm going to clean up my gasket surface on the vehicle as best as I can, and we'll get this thing right back on. I guess I will show a little bit of this just to help you along so you're not toggling back and forth between part 1 and part 2. So here you can see my valve cover all scrubbed up with my right angle roll lock disc. This is one of my favorite tools, I would say, is this little guy. This is probably a $40 tool. I bet you can get it at Harbor Freight for half of that. But then you just get this roll lock attachment, and this is just like a Scotch-Brite pad that you can attach and scrub off gasket surfaces and things like that. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to show, and I do show this in part 1, but I'm going to include it on part 2. So once you pop these out of the valve cover using just like a clip removal tool or pry bar or whatever you have, although the clip removal tool makes very quick work of it, we need to get the grommet off of the bolt. So try and do this one-handed. I've just got my bench vise here. Guess I'll use my knee. And what I do is I grab onto the bolt head and lock that into the vise, and then just stick your pry bar. Sorry, I don't know why my camera's not lining up today. You stick the pry bar in between the grommet and this little kind of T-nut looking thing. Give it a little pry there and a pry there, and then the grommet pops off. So with 2 hands you can just roll through these real quick. You lock one in, pop it off, go on to the next one. And then the new ones, you can put a light coat of oil on if you want, but they should be flexible enough they'll just slide right back on. So hopefully that helps you guys figure that out. And then I need to double check. Actually, I'm going to open up my gasket box and double check that I told you correctly. I think there's a chance you put the grommet in the valve cover first and then stick the bolt in, but I need to double check. So I'll do that and be right back with the update on that. Okay, so I can confirm you want to put the grommet into the valve cover first and then stick the bolt through the grommet, because these do slightly overlap and kind of clip in to the hole there on the valve cover, and if you already had the bolt in, it would be too large and wouldn't fit. So once you get this in, stick the bolt in, and that stretches the bottom of that portion of the grommet to hold it in place. So anyway, I'm going to do the rest of these, put the gasket on, and I'll show you how it all looks before I put it back on the car. So here's what I did. I took a picture just like this, before I took the bolts out, but I'll show you guys kind of up close just to get the idea of the order of how these bolts go. So if you're looking at the large portion of the valve cover to the right, or also as if it came out of the car just like this, across the bottom you have, I'm going to say short and tall, short, short, tall, 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 and then across the top, left to right, tall, tall, short, tall, short. So there's a look at that. Hopefully that answers any questions there. So now, with those pressed in, all we're going to do is set the gasket on there, kind of slide it in, and then get our bolts started again. You just want to make sure the bolts are going through the gasket, obviously, and that the gasket hasn't shifted once you get it on the car and you're kind of bolting it down in the wrong position. So I'll try and get that done. Hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory from this point. And if I run into anything interesting going back together, I will let you know. I'll try not to leave you hanging here and just say installations in the reverse of removal and be done with it. So I'll be right back with any updates. Here's where we're at now. It's about 40 minutes later. It does take a little time to get all these bolts kind of tightened down and torqued in sequence. So take your time. It's, I believe, 80 inch-pounds. And make sure that's inch-pounds. Not very tight at all. Basically, once the bolt gets tight to where it bottoms out, you put just a slight little bit of a snug on that, and that's about 80 inch-pounds. So you need a combination of 10 millimeter deep and swivel and extension and just all kinds of, here's all the stuff I had to use. A flexible, a deep, a regular 3/8, just different 10 millimeters to get this done. But eventually you'll get that all tightened down. And I forgot to mention, you do want to clean up your gasket surface. I could not get my die grinder in there in every location, so I did it wherever I could. And then I used kind of just the combination of just that Scotch-Brite pad off of the roll-lock wheel and then like a rag just to wipe everything down. I did kind of the same thing here on the oil filter tube, or oil fill tube, to clean up that surface. And then I did remove, this is the PCV valve, so coming right off of this hose, attaching to your filler neck, if you break that, that's the PCV valve. And that's about $6 or $7 uptown at the local auto parts store. One thing I did, just to make sure I don't break any more of this line, is I used a heat gun to gently heat up this hose and then pull this barb out of there. So just be careful, make sure you remove this carefully, and then we'll have our new PCV valve to replace that. And I'll kind of show you what I end up doing on the other part that broke with that T, that plastic T there. So I'm going to bolt my filler neck back on with the new gasket that came in the kit. I'm going to twist the old broken PCV valve out of there. It's kind of a twist lock design, so you can see that channel where you will twist it counterclockwise and then lift it out through that hole. And then we'll put the new one in. We'll be done with that. The last thing to do on this side is get that T back on and put our heater hose assembly back in, and then I'll move on to the other side. But I'll probably have one or two more videos or clips showing this side, and then I'll let you refer to part 1 on the driver's side. So we'll be right back with a couple more updates and see you guys in a second. Here's a look at the filler neck bolted back on. I think I have that right with the long screw. There's one long screw at the top left. I'll let you know if not. That's just for the heater hose bracket to clip onto. So it's either the upper or the lower on the left, and I think it's the upper, but I will let you know. Okay, so next thing is to replace this PCV valve. And like I said, all you need to do is twist this. I just used my channel lock pliers. Gently twist this counterclockwise, and then it should pop right out. It's just got a little O-ring down in there. That pops out, and luckily we have a new one here. The part number that I have is 2366. Will it focus on that? 2366. That's about $7. And as long as I ordered the right thing, this will fix our broken, our little broken barb right there. Why they made this like 1/2 inch and this 3/8, I don't know, because that's obviously a weak point right there. And I don't know why it won't focus either, but there we go. There you have it. So all we've got to do is line up the little pin and then give it a twist gently as you push. Give it a twist clockwise. And it kind of hits a detent there and locks in place. And then we will gently slide our hose back on. There you go. You can always heat that hose if yours is really stiff and dry. Heat that gently. You can even use hot water if you need to, just to bring back the rubber. I can't think of the word for that, but anyway, bring back the flexibility so that you can slide that back on. So there we go. I'm going to slide the heater hose assembly back in, and it's about lunchtime, so I'll get this done, take a break, and be back with you guys with kind of the final look. But if you remember, we need to go underneath the AC right here, and then kind of give that a twist. And then up and over, I believe it was up and over this bracket in the back. Trying to do this one-handed is a little bit difficult. There you go. So that lines right up. Let's take a look. Does our bolt line up down there? It looks like there's a chance that's actually going to be the lower. I'm going to look back at my footage, but I believe that long bolt is actually on the bottom left. I'll let you know if not, but no big deal just to switch those two around. So we've got that back in. You just need to slide that bracket over the bolt once you have the hoses attached, and then that bracket, the one that kind of curls down, slide that over the valve cover stud once you have those hoses on. Put your clamps back on, and then we're to the point of fixing this little unfortunate broken PCV mess, and we'll get that taken care of and be done. Okay, so I'll show you what I came up with on this broken T here, and all I've done since the last video is put the airbox back in, and I don't remember if I said on the, you can't see them now, but on the bolts holding on the oil filler neck, the upper left, the way I originally had it, is where that long bolt goes, and you'll figure that out pretty quick. So anyway, it takes a little bit, just as far as order of operations, to get your heater hose assembly back in. For example, if you lock in the back end of it, the front end doesn't line up, so you need to kind of halfway put it on the heater core. So just slide these two on about halfway. I would say don't clip the rear in if you can wait. Get the front on, same thing, about halfway, and then put them both on completely at the same time to finish up. So it'll kind of make sense, and it's not too big of a deal once you get there. So what I figured out on this T is the diameter of these plastic pipes is about 5/8, and that's a good size because heater hose and couplers and all kinds of things are readily available in 5/8. So what I did is just bought a 5/8 T. You can get this at your local parts store. And then I had a bunch of 5/8 heater hose on hand. And if I remember correctly, heater hose, is oil rated, so it can stand up to PCV, and it's fine. So I've got the 5/8, and it's right here accessible. So if you notice that this is getting squishy, you just switch it to like a Gates multi-hose or whatever you need. But what I did is took my pipe cutter, just my mini tubing cutter, and gently cut these tubes off where it was a nice fit. So this one coming from the driver's side originally looked like this, and it had this downward turn. I cut that off right at the end. Actually, it went like this. I cut that off. This one I cut off before it made a little bit of a turn, and now this one I'm going to cut off back here where it's straight. And then I kind of laid this down in here underneath this other hose, so it runs nice and flat and straight to here. There's a nice joint there, and then I'm going to cut this off so it'll have a nice straight path here, and then I'll just cut a chunk of heater hose. You can slide it however far you want to over the pipe, and then you just slide about 3/4 of an inch worth onto the T, and that's all. So I'll get that done, put the reservoir back in and connect my lower hose there, my upper hose there. I've got two 10mm nuts, and then the last thing is just the top half of my airbox with the intake hose, and that's it. So I hope this answers any questions that you have and helps you along the process. If you do have any questions, let me know, and I'll try to respond to your comments as quickly as possible. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.